Trevor asked another really good question. He says, I'm having lots of difficulty going from a ketogenic diet to a whole food plant-based diet, controlling my blood glucose as a person with type 1 diabetes. How do you take insulin on this kind of diet? Okay, Trevor, this is a phenomenal question because we get this question a lot of the time. Okay, let's back up here real quick. If you're eating a ketogenic diet, even if it's a plant-based ketogenic diet, regardless of whether it's plant or animal, your level of insulin resistance grows over the course of time. So let's say you've been eating a ketogenic diet for 3 months or 6 months or a year, okay? Likely your level of insulin resistance is relatively high to begin with, your baseline level of insulin resistance. Now, when you transition to the Mastering Diabetes method, what we recommend doing is dropping your fat intake and simultaneously increasing your carbohydrate intake. The risk that somebody who's been eating a ketogenic diet runs is that if you're already insulin resistant to begin with, if you start to eat a lot of carbohydrates, even if they come from whole foods, then it floods your bloodstream with glucose, and it's very difficult to control your blood glucose values. So my guess is that that's what you're experiencing right now. Anytime you eat a banana, anytime you have some fruit or a potato or some quinoa or something like that, then your blood glucose likely goes way up, and it becomes challenging to try and control that. Here's my recommendation to you. Rather than trying to make large changes to your carbohydrate intake right off the bat, what I would do is I would make more gradual changes, and you will likely see that your insulin sensitivity starts to come up gradually over the course of time. So what I mean by that is, rather than trying to eat large fruit bowls, or rather than trying to eat sort of like higher glycemic carbohydrates, I would instead increase my intake of legumes, so beans and lentils and peas, and non-starchy vegetables. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that for the next week, you started to eat more beans, more lentils, more non-starchy vegetables, and more peas, and that became the sort of base of your diet. Then your blood glucose values will become a lot more controllable, and as a result of that, your insulin needs will also reduce. Then, as you gain insulin sensitivity over the course of 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, judge it. And if you see your blood glucose values are starting to come down, increase by adding 1 fruit. And then maybe the next day add 2 fruits, and so on and so forth. And that way you can kind of like ramp up your fruit intake over the course of a week to 2 weeks. And that will prevent your blood glucose from going sky high every time you do eat a fruit. And you'll be sort of gaining insulin sensitivity and adding fruit to match that increase in insulin sensitivity. So I hope that makes sense. I remember at the very beginning of this process, my blood glucose was much more controllable, but there were times where I had to dose up on large amounts of insulin because I already had a significant amount of baseline insulin resistance to begin with. So I feel you. I totally understand where you're coming from, but trust me, doing a more gradual approach is going to make a big, big, big difference.